All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let's begin. So first of all, we dedicate our learning this morning as a refuah shlema for Moshe Gershon ben Chaya. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, he'll have a complete and enduring refuah. So we'll say top of Mem Zayin and Aleph, the Mishnah. Mi shenizrak alav echa min adamim v'nitma. So it's another interesting case. Someone ultimately again who, remember again, Nazir at the conclusion of his Nazir is bringing 3 karbanos. He's bringing a chatas, an ola, and the shlamim. So what happens? Let's say one of the bloods was sprinkled v'nitma. Listen, that is an interesting case. He became tummy. So he became tummy now after one of the bloods has already been sprinkled. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Soser Esakol. So Rabbi Eliezer says that Rabbi he loses the entire Nazirus. Well, actually, the truth is that let's define it like that for now, even though we're going to revise that in the Gemara just a little bit. But remember, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that we saw yesterday that in order for the Neder Nazirus to end, what has to happen? He requires all the masim. He requires rikas hadam, cutting of the hair, and tnufa. Only then is the Nazirus finally over. Therefore, again, according to Eliezer, if you become tameh, only after one of the sprinkling of the bloods, before all of the concluding processes had been done, so he soser, it literally it undermines the Nazirus. And then again, soser sakol means it destroys everything. Again, we'll qualify that statement. Chacham say no, yavi shar karbonosa v'yitar. Chacham say no, you bring the rest of your karbonos and you're okay. And I will say now, interestingly enough, if you look at the Rush, so the Rush says of here, Chacham yavi shar karbonosa v'yitar, perish lechishe yitar. The Chacham hold like this. Now, I will say, remember in this case, let's say for argument's sake, I offered up the chatos. They sprinkled the blood of the chatos, and then I became tamei mace. So the Chachamim say, not a problem. Obviously, now I can't offer up the rest of my karbanos. Why not? Why not? Because I'm tamei. So therefore, the Chachamim say I have to go through the process of tara. I have to go through purification, and after purification, I could just simply resume offering up the rest of my karbanos. But what? I need not repeat any amount of the Nazirus. And I will say this is the Chachamim Lishitasam, because the Chachamim hold that what? Once one of the sprinkling of the bloods was done, then ultimately again the Nazirus has concluded. Amru lo. So the Chachamim said to Rabbi Eliezer, Maaseh b'Miriam hatarmudis shenizrak aleha echad min adamim. So we'll say there was this episode with Miriam hatarmudis. This is a woman, and she was a Nazira. And what happens? They had sprinkled the blood of her first karban. And they came and they told her that her daughter was unfortunately deathly ill. So Miriam Hatarmudis runs home and she finds Nebuch. When she got home, her daughter had passed away. So we'll say, so now, remember again, she's lost her daughter, but there's also a halachic issue, which is now what? She's tamei tumas ohel, right? Because she's under the same roof now, unfortunately, as her deceased daughter. The Chacham say, Tavi sha'ar karbonoseh v'titar. The Chacham said it's not a problem. She does not lose any of her nazirus. Rather, what happens? Lemaisa again. There's a pause. So remember again. Even the Chacham agree you can't offer up karbonos b'tuma. So she has to undergo the 7-day purification process for tumas meis. But after that process is complete, she could just simply resume the offering of her karbanos. Says the Gemara, Katani Rabbi Eliezer Omer Soser Asakol, V'ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer Kol Achar Melos Shiva Soser. So we'll say the Gemara raises a kasha. The Mishnah makes it sound like this, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, in this case, where the Nazir becomes tamei after the sprinkling of the first blood, then what? Then what's the halacha? You lose, Soser Asakol. You lose everything. Everything sounds like what? Mamish have to repeat the whole Nazirus. But says the Gemara, how could that be? Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that at any time you become tamei, achar malos. Well, so what does achar malos mean? If I become tamei after the duration of my Nazirus has ended, Rabbi Eliezer, we had this long time ago, Rabbi Eliezer Paskind, based on Xeris HaKasav, that's what? The most you lose is 7 days. You'll never have to repeat. Remember, this was a special, unique halacha, according to Rabbi Eliezer, for a Nazir who becomes tamei after the duration of the Nazirus. The most I ever have to repeat after the duration of Nazirus has concluded is 7 days. So for those whole 7 days, why would he say Soser HaKol? To which the Gemara says, no, Amar Rav, My soser nami t'kamar belazar. Soser karbanosov. No. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't mean you have to repeat the whole Nazirus. What Rabbi Eliezer says you have to do is what? You have to repeat all of the karbanos. So we'll say, thank you for that backup there. I appreciate that. It was very nice. So therefore, again, says Rabbi Eliezer like this, that Lamaisa, again, in this case of Rabbi Eliezer will agree that the Nazir has to repeat 7 days. Now the truth is, that's not really such a chiddush, because you're going to have to wait 7 days regardless, because you're tamei. So that's not, what he holds is like this. What do you do with that first carbon that was offered? So let's say again, in the case of the Mishnah, Nazir offered the chatas, and then sprinkled the blood of the chatas, then becomes tamei. Rabbi Eliezer, when he says soser sakol, means yes, you have to repeat 7 days in Nazirus, but in addition to that, what? The chatas you offered is not good. You're going to have to re-offer another chatas. Hachanami mistabra. This appears to be clear in our interpretation of the Mishnah as well. Diktani v'chachamim omrim tavi shar karbanos v'titaher shmamina. Because also, what does the Mishnah say? According to Chacham, they say what? That in this case, yes, you have to wait till 7 days to become pure, but after that, you offer up the remaining karbanos, which indicate to us what? They hold that first carbon was valid, whereas Rabbi Eliezer paskins that first carbon ultimately, again, was invalid. So now what the Gemara is saying over here is that Lamaisa, again, the machlokis, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, is not about repeating the duration of the Nazirus. Both will agree you have to wait 7 days. Now, granted, according to Rabbi Eliezer, those 7 days are 7 days of purification, and also what? And also 7 days of Nazirus. According to the Chachamim, those are just 7 days of purification. What's the Nekudas? What's the machlokes? The machlokes is, what do you do with that first carbon that was offered before Tumah? According to Rabbi Eliezer, you have to repeat it. According to the Chacham, it's absolutely fine. Uma'asanami b'mirim atamudis. And remember, again, now the Gemara says, the rest of the Mishnah makes sense as well. Because what did the Mishnah say? There was an episode of Mirim atamudis, shenizrak ala echad min hadamim. With Mirim atamudis, again, Gemara just quoting the Mishnah, where she offered up the first of her karbanos, the first blood was sprinkled, ubal v'hodi'uha albita shahaisa misukenes. And they came and they told her about her daughter who was deathly ill. She found that her daughter had died. She was now tamei tumas meis. And again, if you look at the lashon of the Mishnah, the Chacham told her, don't worry, meaning just the first carbon you offered is good. Offer up the rest of the karbanos and you're fine. Shmamina. The Gemara says, you see from here that what? That indeed the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is about that first carbon and its validity. According to Chachamim, it's valid, and you just offer up the remaining karbanos. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you have to re-offer the first carbon as well. So the Rambam paskins like the Chachamim, and therefore in this case again, where the Nazir would become tamei after the sprinkling of the blood of the first carbon, even though you'd have to now wait 7 days before offering up the rest of the karbanos, the Rambam Pask is like the Chum that first carbon would be valid and it does not have to be repeated. Hadron Allah, Shlosha Minin. Kohen Gadol ben Nazir. Both say, now this is a really fascinating sugya. It's going to take us we're going to see. Kohen Gadol ben Nazir. So listen to this case. There's a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir walking together. This is not like a joke. That's right. So there's not Kohen Gadol, Nazir, and a priest. There's not. So there's a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir together. So what's the halacha? Ein mitamin likroveim. So we'll say Kohen Gadol and Nazir share a common denominator, which is what? Neither of them are permitted to become tamei, even for the Zayin Krovim, even for the 7 close relatives. Remember, again, this stands in contradistinction to a Kohen Hedyot, where as much as a Kohen Hedyot also just can't become randomly tamei, Kohen Hedyot does have, I want to be clear, it's not just a dispensation. Actually, we'll see, it's interesting machlokes. If the ability for a Kohen Hedyot to become tamei for the Zayin Krovim, for the 7 close relatives, a mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, spouse, wife, so is that a reshus? Is that a license? Or is it an obligation? So we'll get into that a little bit. But again, a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir cannot become tamei even for the 7 close relatives. However, aval mitamin lemeis mitzvah. But Abba said they can become tamei for a meis mitzvah. Remember, again, we've spoken a little bit about meis mitzvah a few days ago. I think it was over Yantiv, right? Mm-hmm. That meis mitzvah, the definition of a meis mitzvah is someone who literally has no kovrim. Someone ultimately, again, no one to bury them. Again, now I want to be clear. Let's say you have someone. Remember, just to give you the extreme case that the Gemara dealt with. Let's say somebody dies and their son is the Kohen Gadol. So person's a meis mitzvah. There's no one to bury them because the son can't become tamei. Remember, that's not called meis mitzvah. Why? Because that son could arrange for burial. So remember again, any makes mitzvah, someone is not just who has nobody to actively bury them, but no one to even take care of hiring other people to bury them as well. So Kohen Gadol Nazir can become tummy for a makes mitzvah. For example, listen to this. This is really fascinating. So let's say Kohen Gadol and Nazir walking on the road. Umatzu meis mitzvah. So we'll say, listen to this fascinating shaila. Kohen Gadol and Nazir are walking down the road and they find a meis mitzvah. So now what's going to be the shaila? The shaila is, who should become tamei to bury the meis mitzvah? Right? Let's say again. Now this is presupposing, by the way, that you only need one person. Right? Let's assume for a moment you only need one person to accomplish the whole thing. So who should go ahead and do it? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yitma Kohen Gadol va'al Yitma Nazir. So Rabbi Eliezer says the Kohen Gadol should do it, and not the Nazir. The Chachamim Omrim Yitma Nazir va'al Yitma Kohen Hedyot. So also listen to this. The Chachamim say, forget about Kohen Gadol, even if it's a choice. Even if it's a choice between a Nazir and a Kohen Hedyot, still it's always better for a Nazir to do it than any Kohanim. Now both say, now obviously you understand what they're arguing about ultimately is whose Kedusha is more acute, or whose Kedusha is more intense. Is Kedushas Kahuna or Kedushas Kohen Gadol, or Kedushas Nazir more intense? Listen to this. Amar lahem Rabbi Eliezer Yitama Kohen. So Rabbi Eliezer says the Kohen should be the one who becomes Tameh, and I'll tell you why. She'eno maybe karban al tumaso. Because they both say, remember, the Kohen, when he becomes Tameh, he does not bring a karban for his tumah. Both remember again, what happens ultimately again if a Nazir becomes Tameh? If a Nazir becomes Tameh, then Lamaisa again, first of all, it undermines his entire Nazir. He's got to start all over again. Okay, fine, that doesn't bother us as much. What does bother us even more is he has to bring a karban for his tumah. What Rabbi Eliezer understands is the fact that a Nazir has to bring a karban for his tumah is indicative of the fact that what? That his kedusha is more acute than that of the Kohen Gadol. The haraya, because violation of that kedusha ultimately requires a karban, as opposed to a Kohen if he becomes tamei. Also, episode Kohen if he becomes tamei, so whatever, he has to go through the process of tahara. But there is no sacrificial obligation. Therefore, because of the sacrificial obligation for Nazir, the kedusha of Nazir is more acute. Therefore, again, if there's a choice between the Kohen Gadol becoming tamei, or the Nazir becoming tamei, it should be the Nazir who becomes tamei. Amru lo. So the Chachamim responded, no. Yitma Nazir she'im kedushaso kedushas olam va'al yitma kohen shekedushaso kedushas olam. So we'll say the Chachamim. Now here's what's interesting. So the Chachamim respond and they say, no, the kedusha of the kohen is more acute. Why? Because his kedusha. First of all, I'll say it's two things. When they say kedusha, so kedusha olam, what they're saying is not just in terms of duration. They're also talking about the fact that it is a conferred kedusha. No, is that the right word? It's a conferred kedusha. It's an inherent kedusha. Maybe inherent is the better word. It's an inherent kedusha as opposed to the nazir, which is a voluntary bestowed. Right, it's a sign, voluntary, but it's okay. You understand. The point is, let's go with inherent. The Kohen has an inherent kedusha versus what's called Nazir is more of an, I don't know if that's the right term, but we'll use it for now, an assigned kedusha. Right. The idea over here. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim agree on principle, and what's the principle they agree on? That the person with lesser kedusha should be the one who becomes tamei. That's the thing. So everyone's on agreement with the principle. The shaila just is who has lesser kedusha or who has greater kedusha. So again, Rabbi Eliezer says that it's clearly the Nazir has greater kedusha because violation of his kedusha results in sacrificial obligation. If you have to bring a karban when you become tamei, that must mean that your kedusha is more intense and more acute. Therefore, the Kohen Gadol should become tamei. So again, Chachamim say no. Kohen is kedusha, so kedusha has olam. It's an eternal kedusha. It's an inherent kedusha versus Nazir, which is an assigned kedusha. I will say, by the way, now once they say that, you also understand why, according to Rabbi Eliezer, according to the Chachamim, they would even hold that a Nazir should become tamei even before who? Even before a Kohen Hedyot. Because remember, the argument of Kedushas Olam is not just an argument by Kohen Gadol, it's an argument by any Kohen. Says the Gemara. Bishlama, listen to this. Bishlama Kohen Gadol. I will say this is very exciting. No? Yeah, good. This is because again, now you can see already where this is going to go. Where we're going to go ahead and we're going to apply. We're going to see all different people and all the relative levels of kedusha. So Bishlam Kohen Gadol the Nazir, high Saver Kohen Gadol Adif, the high Saver Nazir Adif. So once it says the Gemara, okay, the truth is, I hear. Why about this? I hear this case of Kohen Gadol Nazir, and I remember this case of Kohen Gadol Nazir is also a wonderfully tension-provoking case because they are two very similar personalities in terms of their restrictions. So I understand Chachamim hold that Kohen Gadol is greater, and Rabbi Elazar holds that Nazir is greater. Listen to this: Mashuach b'shemen hamishcha umeruba bebegadim. Listen to this. Let's say you have two different Kohanim. Now, both say, remember, these are two Kohanim Gedolim. Right? Let's say you have a Kohen Gadol who was anointed with Shemen HaMishcha, with anointing oil, and Meruba Bebegadim. Now, both say, remember, the way you're supposed to go ahead and, in an ideal sense, is the way you're supposed to anoint a Kohen Gadol. Kohanim Gedolim and Malachim and kings are anointed in the same way, Shemen HaMishcha, with anointing oil. Now remember again, historically we know anointing oil was hidden away at some point in time. So at that point, how do they anoint Kohanim Gedolim? It was called Meruba Begadim. You would put on the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, and that ultimately would be your induction into the service of the Kahuna Gedola. So let's say you have over here two Kohanim Gedolim, one who is anointed with anointing oil, and one who is Meruba Bebegadim, and one ultimately who became a Kohen Gadol, ultimately again through Begadim. Now, obviously we're not going to get into right now how this is possible, because remember again, you never have two simultaneously functioning Kohanim Gedolim. But that doesn't matter for our case right now. We're trying to figure out relative levels of kedusha. So for argument's sake, if you were to have, although again the Rush does come up with this, Tosas also points out how you could have it, but again for our discussions, it's not really all that important. The idea is you have them; they're standing side by side. So who should become Tamei Lames? So listen to this. So Mashuach b'shemen hamishcha adif. So the Kohen Gadol anointed with anointing oil, ultimately again is the one who has greater kedusha. Why, Rabosai? Di'ilu Mashuach b'shemen hamishcha mevi par haba kol mitzvos. Ve'ilu meruba begadim, ein mevi. Also, listen to this. So there's something called par haba akol mitzvos, which is that if the Kohen Gadol offers or issues an erroneous ruling, he issues a psak halacha that permits something that under normal circumstances would be a chiyuv kares. So let's say, for example, the Kohen Gadol has a psak halacha that permits someone to eat a particular piece of chilif, a particular fat. And it turns out that the fat is indeed prohibited. Remember, consumption of illegal chilif could result in kares. So the Kohen Gadol has to bring a special offering, a special carbon called par haba al kol mitzvos. The Gemara points out is that not every Kohen Gadol brings that offering, but rather it is only a Kohen Gadol who was anointed with Shemen HaMishcha. But a Kohen Gadol who was anointed Meruba Bebegadim does not bring that carbon. So the Gemara wants to suggest is that the fact that the Kohen anointed with Shemen HaMishcha brings that parabal kol mitzvos, and a Meruba Begadim does not, indicates that what? That the Kohen that is Nimshach b'Shemen HaMishcha has greater Kedusha than the one who is Meruba Begadim. Therefore, if both of them are walking on the road together and there is a Meis Mitzvah, the Meruba Begadim should be Matame himself and the Mashuach b'Shemen HaMishcha should not. Fine. Next. Mashuach Sha'avar u'Meruba Begadim. Oh, so this is also another great case. Listen to this. Let's say you have these are two Kohanim Gedolim. Mashuach Sha'avar, the first Kohen Gadol was anointed with anointing oil. He is Kohen Gadol Emeritus. Kohen Gadol Emeritus. Okay? Versus Meruba Begadim. Meruba Begadim means he's the active Kohen Gadol, but he was not anointed with oil. Instead, he put on the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, and that's how he became the Kohen Gadol. So now remember, we've established that active Mashuach B'Shemen HaMishcha is more kadosh than active Meruba Begadim. Now the shaila is retired Mashuach B'Shemen HaMishcha, was his status relative to Meruba Begadim? So says the Gemara, Meruba Begadim Adif. We'll say in this case over here, the Kohen Gadol who was anointed with clothing, who was Meru Begadim, he has greater kedusha than the Kohen Gadol emeritus. Even though the Kohen Gadol emeritus was anointed with oil, the Meruba Begadim Avid Avoda, the Ilu Mashuach Sha'avar. Lav baravodu. So we'll say, so the truth is, this was the easy one. Why is this the easy one? Because Lamaisa, again, the Kohen Sha'av, the Kohen Gadol Sha'avar, even though he's anointed with oil, he's retired. So we'll also, once you understand, retired Kohanim Gedolim often find, we'll discuss this in greater depth, but find themselves in an interesting position. Because remember, again, once you serve this Kohen Gadol, you can never go back to being a Kohen Hedyot. So that Kohen Gadol Sha'avar is an interesting case of like a Nishtahin Nishtaher. He's really in Kohanic limbo because he can't really do anything. So the Gemara says, of course, the Meruba Begadim, of course, is going to have greater Kedusha. Why? Because the Meruba Begadim is the one who's doing the Avodah. He's performing sacrificial service and rites, versus the Kohen Gadol Sha'avar, even though he's Mashuach, even though he's anointed with oil, he's not doing Avodah. So the Mashuach Sha'avar should be Metami for the Meis Mitzvah, and not the Meruba Begadim. Next, Avar Machmas Kiruyav, Va'avar Machmas Mu'o. Well, so listen to this. Let's say you have two former Kohanim Gedolim. We'll say now one of them is quote unquote former. Why? Because he had a seminal emission. Remember, the halacha is this is in general, but it's more acute by Kohanim, which is that if a Kohen has a seminal emission, he's a Baal Keri. A Baal Keri, we'll say the halacha has a level of tumah, but it's only tumah for one day, meaning the day that the emission occurred, he goes to the mikvah, and that night, Herav Shemesh, he's fine, he's tar again. So we'll say, let's say the Kohen Gadol had a seminal emission, which means that, and let's say again, it's what's today? Today's Thursday. Right? Say seminal emission on Thursday. Okay, so for today he can't do the avoda. So we'll say, so what happens? So he's what's called avar machmas kiruyav. He's the non-practicing Kohen Gadol, so he's quote unquote the Kohen Gadol emeritus for today. Remember, that's why they have a backup. There's always a backup Kohen Gadol. So for today, he's the non-practicing Kohen Gadol. And then there's another non-practicing Kohen Gadol, but he's a non-practicing Kohen Gadol. Why? Because he developed a mum. So he developed a mum. He developed some kind of disqualifying blemish, whatever it might be. Therefore, I'm sorry. So the case over here is it's a mum keva. He developed a mum keva, an established. It's not going away, and therefore again he was retired. He was the Kohen Gadol, developed this mum, this blemish. He was retired. So now you have, it's an interesting case by this. You have quote unquote two former Kohanim Gedolim. Now one, of course, is just the former Kohen Gadol for how long? For today, and one is a former Kohen Gadol permanently. They're walking together. They go ahead and come across the Meis Mitzvah. Who should bury him? Avar Machmas Kiruyav Adif. So we'll say the Kohen Gadol, who is only the former Kohen Gadol because of the seminal emission, he has greater kedusha than the other guy. Why? Di'ilu hai chazila avod l'machar, v'ilu avar machmas mumo lo chazila avod. So we'll say again, this also is a very intuitive one. Obviously, the Kohen Gadol, who's the former Kohen Gadol for the day because of the seminal emission, has greater kedusha than the one who has the mum. Because again, the guy with the seminal emission, at least tomorrow, he'll be back on duty. The other, the avar machmas mumo, ultimately, again, he's retired forever. Fine. Ibarilahu. So Moses said in that case, again, the Kohen Gadol, who was retired because of his mum, will be the one who will become tamei, and the other one will not. Ibarilahu. Moses, another case. Mashuach milchama usigan. Moses, listen to this case. Now, by the way, so now we're moving past. In the previous cases, we were comparing different levels of Kohanim Gedolim. Now we're moving past that a little bit and going ahead and moving to the next tier of Kohanim. Let's say you have the Mashuach Milchama and the Skan. So who was the Mashuach Milchama? The Mashuach Milchama ultimately, again, was the Kohen whose specific job was to lead the army out to war, right? He was the one ultimately that would give the whole speech before going out to war, listing all of the exemptions. He's the one that would give them the divrei chizuk, the divrei orus, that they're going to be successful. So let's say there's the Mashuach Milchama and the Skan. Who is the Skan? So the Skan, of course, is the assistant Kohen Gadol, the backup Kohen Gadol. So we'll say if you have these two people walking on the road together, Mashuach Milchama and Skan, and there's a Meis Mitzvah, who should become tamei to take care of the Meis Mitzvah? So listen to this. Heiminayu adif. So the Gemara says, Mashuach milchama adif. So the one who was anointed for battle, he ultimately has greater kedusha. Why? the chazi limilchama, because on one hand, again, they both say he is fit, meaning he's fit for his job. He's ultimately the one who leads them out to war. Ol dilma skan adif, the chazi la'avoda. So let's say, see here what's interesting over here? The common denominator between both of these people is right now in this moment, when they're walking down the road and they encounter the Meis Mitzvah, they're both quote unquote inactive. What does that mean? Meaning they both have specific jobs, but neither of them is fulfilling a specific job right now. So the Mashuach Milchama, ultimately, again, his job is to lead the people out to war. So that's what he's fit for. Versus the Sgan, who if the Kohen Gadol becomes disqualified, is ready to step in for the Avodah. So who has greater Kiddusha? To which the Gemara says, Tashma Desanya, Ein bein Mashuach Milchama Liskan. There is no distinction between the Kohen who is Mashuach Milchama, who is anointed for war, and the Skan Kohen Gadol. Ella Shim Hayu Mahalchin Bederech Umatzu Meis Mitzvah Yitami Mashuach Milchama Va'ayitami Asgan. So we'll say, all right. So the Brisa seems to be quite explicit. There's no distinction between them, meaning they're both considered to be anointed Kohanim. One exception between them is that if they're both walking down the road together, and what happens? And they come across a Meis Mitzvah, the Mashuach Milchama should become Tameh, and the Skan should not. Who's the husband?
He did his job, whereas the Skan is someone who's going
not necessarily, but again, what if war happens now? War happens again, the Skan's going to be needed again. Right, meaning again, that's the common denominator between both of them is you could make the argument that both are on call. They're both on call. They're both always wearing, their Kohanic pagers because something happens to the Kohen Gadol, so Skan's got to kick. War comes about, the Mashuach Milchama has to kick in.
Only goes to that status when there is a Milchama, and then they elevate him to that.
Correct. Well, no. He's in that status, meaning you are the Kohen Gadol, you are the Kohen Mashuach Milchama. That's your office. You're inactive now because there's no war. Same thing with the Skan. You're the Skan Kohen Gadol. You're inactive right now because the Kohen Gadol is fine. So the common denominator between both of them is they both have a higher calling, but their higher calling is only activated in the event that certain circumstances occur. And right now, neither of their circumstances have materialized. So they both stand by Kohanim.
Skan Kohen Gadol, not Skan to this Mashuach Milchama.
No, correct. There is no Sgan Mashuach Milchama. The only is an important point I will say. Remember, the only person who has a backup, the only high profile Kohen who has a backup is going to be the Kohen Gadol, and that's because remember, every day there are avodas that the Kohen Gadol himself must do. So there must always be a Kohen Gadol. Mashuach Milchama, worst case scenario, if Mashuach Milchama died, and the next day there's a war, they'll appoint another guy. So it says the Gemara the following. So both say here the Brisa seems to be quite explicit. The Brisa says that if the Mashuach Milchama and the Skan Kohen Gadol are walking on the road together and they find the Meis Mitzvah, so the Mashuach Milchama should become Tameh and not the Skan. V'hatanya Mashuach Milchama kodem l'Skan. But Rabbi said there's another Brisa, and the Brisa says that the Mashuach Milchama is more chashuv kodem. We assume that kodem means that ultimately again, Kodem means that he's more chashuv than this guy. So also it seems to contradict it. Because on one hand, the Brisa is telling me if they're walking down the street together, the Mashuach Milchama should become Tamei for the Meis Mitzvah and not the Skan. But yet the very next Brisa says that the Mashuach Milchama is more chashuv than the Skan. So what's going on? Also, this is amazing. Arma Zutra, this is really fascinating. Le'inyan hacheyoso Mashuach Milchama adif. Rabbi say, in terms of sustaining him, in terms of sustaining one of them, the Mashuach Milchama is more important. Now, I will say, now what does that mean? Take a look. Actually, let's finish reading this. My time, what's the reason? The Talu Bei Rabim. Because I will say, people depend on him. And I will say, now take a look. This is absolutely amazing. Take a look at the Rush for just a moment. V'hatanya, it's the last, and I don't know, I think we all have different arrangements of the Rush. The last two lines in the Rush, right-hand column. V'hatanya, Mashuach Milchama Kodem L'Skan, Perishut L'Sef Teharis Misna, Le'inyan Lachioso, Kegon Lahaktim Lo Mizonos, or Lefakeach Es Hagal. Boss, this is going to blow your mind. Let's just switch gears for just a moment. Let's say both Kohanim are trapped under rubble. Right? Mashuach Milchama and the Sgan Kohen Gadol. And what? And you can only save one of them. Or there's only enough food for one of them. Who do you save under those circumstances? So the Gemara says, in that respect, you save the Mashuach Milchama. Why do you say the Mashuach Milchama? So again, because the Gemara said, Mishum Detalu Bei Rabim, because the multitudes are dependent on him. And look at the Rush again. Mashuach Milchama Adif Detalu Bei Rabim, Kol Erech HaMilchama Na'as Al Piv. Because Rabbi say he is the one ultimately that leads the army out to war. Look at Rashi for just a moment. The Talibei Rabbim, the Avid Milchama B'Shuram. Did you hear this chap over here? This is absolutely amazing on so many levels. What the Gemara is saying is like this: the Mashuach on sort of a Chashivos level, the Mashuach Milchama is more important than the Skan. Why? The Skan is important on both sides because the Skan is needed in the event something happens to Kohen Gadol. Someone needs to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. But I will say, here's what's amazing: from the eyes of your worth to Klal Yisrael, who has greater worth? Someone who offers up ketores in the Beis HaMikdash, or someone who leads the masses and inspires the masses and is there for them in times of crisis and times of war? The Gemara says it's better to be there for the rabbim than it is to offer up ketores in the Beis HaMikdash. Absolutely amazing. Therefore, if there's only enough resources to save one of them, you save the Mashiach. Do you understand what this means, by the way? You understand what it's saying? What it's saying is there is nothing greater you could do in life than serve the klal. That is the pinnacle of Judaic accomplishment. It is the pinnacle of greatness. It's to be there for your people. Yeah, it's great to offer up ketores. There's no shaila about that. But if you have a choice in saving one of them, you save the Mashiach Melchama. On the other hand, or the inyan tuma sgan adif. On the other hand, when it comes to tuma, meaning if it comes to a choice of who's going to become tameh, the sgan or the mashuach milchama, so we'd rather have the mashuach milchama become tameh and not the sgan. The sanya. As well as I see here, so now again, you understand the Gemara is now saying that the braisos are not contradictory. So therefore, when it comes to tuma, and there's a choice between who's going to become tameh, the skan kohen gadol or the mashuach milchama. The mashuach milchama becomes tameh. I will say, we're not going to get to it now, but there's an interesting discussion on the poskim in terms of can the mashuach milchama do his job even betuma. And I will say, b'pashtos, the answer is yes. Why? Because Lemaisa, again, he's going out to war. I'm saying there's a whole bunch of Tumah when it comes out to war. So, again, but leaving that aside, when it comes to Tumah, so ultimately, again, everyone will agree that the Mashuach Milchama should become Tameh before the Skan. He should take care of the mitzvah. That's the Brisa means when it says they're walking on the road, they both see the Meis mitzvah. Ultimately, the Mashuach Milchama should become Tameh, leave the Skan in a state of Tara. However, again, when it comes to who is more important, so to speak, so the Mashuach Milchama has Kedimus over the Sgan Kohen Gadol. Why? Because the Mashuach Milchama serves the Rabbim. He serves the masses. And Rabbi said that's the highest calling within our people. So the Gemara just says Desanya. But yet we try to preserve the Tara of the Sgan, ultimately again over the Mashuach Milchama. This nan Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus Omer, Lama Tiknu Sgan Kohen Gadol. Why did they establish a scan for the Kohen Gadol? Very simply, Shem Irabo Psul Hari Nichnas Umishamish Tachtov. Because also you remember the whole which the Gemara is just saying intuitively. This is why we want to preserve the kedusha of the scan to whatever degree possible. Because what's the whole point of the scan? The point of the scan is should the Kohen Gadol become tamei, we want the backup to be there. So obviously, I will say if the backup becomes tamei, it kind of undermines the entire purpose. Therefore, because he's the backup Kohen Gadol, we try to preserve his kedusha to whatever degree possible, and therefore we'd rather have the mashuach milchama ultimately become tamei over him. Ad kan lo pligi ela bekohen gadol v'nazir ki azli behadi adodi. So now the Gemara kind of wants to conclude with just one last thought that up until now this machlokes only came up over here because you had the kohen gadol and nazir walking on the road together. So we'll say when they're walking on the road together, and if we presuppose that that only one of them is necessary to ultimately bury the meis mitzvah, so then I understand why this machlokes comes up, because the shaila ultimately is who should become tamei and who shouldn't. Aval chad lekudei bar itmuye inun. But I will say, but at the end of the day, one thing is clear, bless you, which is what? That if either of them were walking alone, then what? It goes without saying that they would become tamei for the meis mitzvah. So we'll say with the Gemara, now the Gemara is kind of circling back, and let's go back to basics. We got caught up in a discussion about relative kedusha, and ultimately again, who should become tamei when you have a choice of only one of them becoming tamei. But one thing is clear, says the Gemara, that if either Kohen Gadol or Nazir were walking themselves on the road, that Lamaisa, again, they definitely would become Tameh for a Meis Mitzvah. To which the Gemara now says, Minahani Mili. So it's interesting, because we got so caught up in this discussion of who, like kedimos, of precedence of kedusha. Let's go back to basics a little bit. How do we know that for a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir that they do become tamei for Meis Mitzvah? Where do we know that from? The Tanah Abanah. Let's just do a few more lines. Tanah Abanah, because we're in a brayso. I'll call nafshos meis lo yavo. So both say, remember, this is the pasuk by Kohen Gadol. So the pasuk says, "V'akol nafshos meis lo yavo la'aviv uliimo lo yitama." So the pasuk says that on all nafshos meis, for any dead people, the Kohen Gadol should not come in contact with them. La'aviv uliimo lo yitama. For his mother and his father, he should not go ahead and become tamei. So the Gemara says, "B'makas of medaber." So both say, so when the pasuk says, "I'll call nafshos meis," when the pasuk says for any people who die, for any dead people, the Kohen Gadol should not come in contact. Who are we talking about? Ibir Chokim, if you want to say he's dealing with non-relatives, Kal v'chomer, then you can make a Kal v'chomer. Uma Kohen Hedyot, Shu Mitami L'Krovim, Ena Mitami L'Rechokim. They both say if a Kohen Hedyot who cannot become tamei, who can become tamei for krovim, for relatives, can't be for the 7 close relatives, can become tamei for rechokim. Kohen Gadol shenim tamei lekrovim, eino din shenim tamei lerechokim. The Rebbe say Kohen Gadol who cannot become tamei for krovim, all the more so again he can't become tamei for rechokim. Ella bekrovim hakasav medaber. Rather, says the Gemara, that phrase al kol nafshos meis refers to who Rebbe say. Even the Kohen Gadol's close relatives. He may not become tamei even for the close relatives. Ula aviv hu de'eno metame, hametame lemeis mitzvah. And Shabbos says, here's the interesting part. If that's true, when the pasuk says, "Al kol nafshos meis lo yavo," is referring to the Kohen Gadol's close relatives, and there's a follow-up shaila. What's the follow-up shaila? Why does it have to say ula aviv ula imo lo yitama? Why does it have to specify those two things? I'm going to tell you why. Those are drashas. Ula aviv. What do I learn out from the fact that it says he can't become tamei for his father? La aviv hu de'enu matame hametame hu lemeis mitzvah. Oh, so we'll say the Torah singles out father to teach me. It's for his father that he may not become tamei, but for a meis mitzvah he can. Uli imo l'gzera shava. And Abba say, what do we learn out from imo? From imo we learn out gzera shava. And Abba say, we'll see that gzera shava will be the gzera shava. Ultimately, we'll connect Kohen Gadol to Nazir, but we're going to stop over here for today. So Abba say, so what we conclude with now is we've established all of our categories of relative kedusha among the different kohanim. That's number one. Now we've also established is again akol nafshos meis lo yavo. Teaches me that a Kohen Gadol may not become tamei for all of his relatives, close relatives. La'aviv, however, teaches me that he may become tamei ultimately again for a meis mitzvah. Imo, we learn out gzeir shava. Meretz Hashem will expound that gzeir shava tomorrow.
Short question. Kohen Gadol.